Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to GasWorld Webinars, a dynamic new communication platform for the global industrial gases business. I'm your host, Rob Cockerill, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this three-part series of thought leadership webinars, delivered by GasWorld TV and sponsored by Enova. A lot's changed since GasWorld was last preparing to connect us all in person. Many of you may remember we were gearing up for both our H2View Hydrogen Summit in Munich in April, and then our European Industrial Gases Summit in Budapest in June. But the world has changed on so many levels since then, as we're all too well aware. How we live, work, and do business has been transformed in the last 12 weeks or more. We've been forced to rethink how we operate and do business. Our industry has been forced to embrace new approaches to its core pillars of interaction and globally connecting, as well as the logistical challenge of delivering product. Here in this new series of webinars, we aim to explore the bandwidth in your business during lockdown and beyond. We're committed to connecting our industry through discussion, debate, and insight, whatever the backdrop. And here with GasWorld Webinars, we'll follow a journey from lockdown to locked and loaded with opportunities, and hopefully the toolkit to realise those. Today we're going to look at the lessons learned from lockdown, and while we can't make any promises about your audio or video quality, we can promise you it will be a webinar rich in content. And we begin that content with Chet Rashamwala, CEO of Enova. I asked Chet what he thought about the new rules of engagement in doing business, how Enova has found this experience, and what learnings he thinks we might take forward. And I'm delighted to say that we have Chet here right now, so it's very much a case of over to you, Chet. We can see them.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. These are indeed unprecedented times. And all of us here today are undoubtedly experienced in discussing industry-specific situations and impacts. But this pandemic has swept across industries and people and around the entire planet. We're all forced to rethink many aspects of our personal lives and our business lives. And from the industrial gases perspective, there's some clear lessons that are formulating. Certainly at Enova, where we provide hardware and software that enables remote, intelligent management of industrial assets, we've been in a unique position with the view across providers around the world. One example is from New York City. One of Enova's customers, a supplier of medical oxygen in New York City, was able to respond very quickly because of remotely monitored tank data. They were able to react not only quickly, but effectively, redirecting supplies from deliveries that were scheduled to go to elective surgery locations that had been closed to the hospitals that so desperately needed it. Another customer helped out in tornado relief efforts that happened during the COVID pandemic. 2 months ago, the city of Seneca in South Carolina was hit by a tornado. There were no gas stations operational to be able to sell generator fuel. And the recovery efforts were further hampered by COVID and the amount of damage to the area. It's quite a rural place, and there was a lot of work needed to restore power and services. And our partners at Lindsay Oil received an alarm for a storage tank at a marina that was going through too much fuel for the post-tornado conditions. And we learned that this customer was donating 5 gallons of gasoline to anyone who needed it right away, and lines were forming at his tank. Every fuel station set up behind the local fire station, and that's the picture you see here. And Matt was pumping the fuel and donating it to the community 5 gallons at a time. Drivers were monitoring the tanks with the no fill up the tanks again as we kept pumping to the people waiting in line. So while we could not travel at the time, we continued to support the community in Seneca. Not everyone has the same ability to derive these actionable insights. And here's what we see, that the survivors will emerge stronger. This is Denver at the height of COVID-19. Nothing going anywhere, like a lot of the world. Some companies will not have survived this, and others will have significantly weakened. But the true survivors are the ones that are going to emerge stronger. And in the post-pandemic economy, we learned that physical location does not matter anymore. What matters is being connected to your assets anytime, anywhere, all the time. Whether you're working from home or you're working from the beach. The lesson learned is that the use of enabling technologies will divide the strong from the weak in this world. And the trend was already evident. In a pandemic world, it's even more so. Technologies such as IoT or software as a service and the like are consistently mentioned as technologies that could be used to help accelerate the transition from today's industrial economy to one that's increasingly connected, mobile, and enabling a remote workforce. That 73% of companies are investing in IoT devices. I believe this is the most important investment they can make to manage costs. So today in the gas world, we see some companies spending as much as 25 to 40% more than necessary to operate their business. So it gets to, how do we do more with what we have? And in some cases, how do we do more with less? That's never been such a strong lesson as it is now. The ability to harness cash flow and efficiency will separate the pack in the future. And with the pandemic, many firms were forced to either furlough or reduce staff. Adaptable workplaces and leaner productivity quickly emerged as indicators for those companies that were able to manage through this challenge and be successful in the new world. And realize that those that emerge will be leaner and more efficient, and you'll have to compete with them. So COVID-19 has really been an industry accelerator for industry consolidation. Debt will most likely play a very key factor in the future, and it's going to drive consolidation. There's a lesson learned here for a lot of companies that got caught up in a lower risk-tolerant environment, understanding that scale, liquidity, and cash flow really matter in this new world. We will likely see early consolidation in the space, with recent events acting as an accelerator. And it may also change the working capital levels that businesses will typically operate at. Highly leveraged and unprofitable companies may struggle to secure new rounds of capital. And so COVID-19 has really brought into focus the key technology investments that companies should be making to survive in this post-COVID environment. It'll be an accelerator to running trucks less, providing competitive maintenance, and as I said earlier, to times of crisis. So gaining insight and the agility to act on it will have made the difference. You know, those that have the data that could derive the insight and act on it were the ones that really shined during the lockdown. They had data, insight, and they acted on it. Here's one such customer, NextAir. They are a hero company. In Tennessee, they use the data from tank monitors to provide emergency response, delivering and setting up emergency backup medical oxygen at local hospitals. The lesson we learned here is that in the post-pandemic world, there's a new playbook. Our priorities have changed. We have three priorities. Number one, we focus on employee health and safety. And that's not only physical health, that's mental health, and that's dealing with the stresses of the current world. So that's number one. Number two is preventing the spread of the virus and doing everything we can to support that. And number three is then business continuity. Our workplaces are different, and Enova is an essential business, and our teams have continued production throughout this crisis. But to do this safely, we created new protocols of sanitation, of personal protective equipment, of health checks, and work from home. There are also potential long-term impacts on the workplace. Many companies will adopt a new style of work, and some have already made these permanent. IoT and connecting us is an enabler in the new world, It certainly has allowed essential work and operations to continue, and it has allowed businesses to respond and adapt to new conditions. And it's helped to keep operations open and the jobs that go with those. Many times in the pandemic, we've seen companies not able to respond fast enough. Those that can will emerge stronger on the other side. And digitization of the supply chain is no longer optional. It really is the business continuity imperative. Many of you have heard me speak at other events, even at the last Gas World event, and it's been an important topic for me, as you all know. But now, more than ever, I really believe it's a business imperative. Those that were already transforming their businesses with reliable digital transformation and reliable technologies that work are quickly moving ahead of the pack in the post-pandemic world. And to reduce their risk, to track these assets for better compliance and reporting, for health and safety, or for corporate responsibility, or for better customer engagement, it's all been paramount. And while we all work with customers, and while how we all work with customers is changing, we know that business models are changing too. So we know that our industry colleagues and participants are more focused on cash flow than profitability. And Enova will address this with IoT technology and supporting a managed service model where clients are not paying for capital upfront in what is a cash-constrained environment. And the appetite for an MSA is high as all of us look to preserve cash. So well-capitalized, well-positioned, positive cash flow businesses are going to consolidate the undercapped businesses and offer the customer the benefits of MSA options. And on the industrial side, well-capped providers can also grow at a higher rate due to this capital base. On the customer end, the focus is on cash preservation, reducing labor dependencies wherever possible. And Enova understands and meets these new dynamics with its technology, its scale, and its partnership with its customers. So I thank you all for your time today. I hope you found this helpful. In short, and as a quick summary, supply chains are digitizing, and COVID has accelerated this imperative. In the post-pandemic world, remote operation and smart IoT are our new foundation. We all need to learn to do our jobs from our phone. And being able to harness that data is critical to adapting in a new world. So thank you for your
Thanks
time.
for those insights,
and
Chet.
It's back to you, Rob.
It's really fascinating to see those statistics and also how Enova has not only adapted and managed change itself, but helped others to adapt in this climate. Before we move on, I'd just like to ask, as a leading technology innovator, do you think this pandemic and the resulting measures has thrown the spotlight on both digitization and remote monitoring technologies? Absolutely. Thanks, Chet. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you again later. Now it's over to Ravin Mirchandani, Director of Mac Valves and Chairman of the Adore Group. Now, for anyone that knows Ravin, they'll know that he seems to be traveling all over the world most weeks of the year, like many of us in our industry. But we understand you've been on lockdown in India since this pandemic really took hold in March, Ravin. So how has it been being in one place for quite so long? What's the business climate been like in India and Asia? And what lessons do you think we've learned from lockdown?
Excellent question. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you for having me on the panel. First up, Chet, brilliant presentation, great information, and thank you for bringing us together with Enova sponsoring the webinar today. So it's been a very interesting 12 weeks, I can say. It seems almost a different universe, thinking of the travels that I did in February and March, where there was 1 week in Germany, Sweden, Finland, France, Belgium, and then the next week in Australia. And the pandemic is progressing at that time. So, you know, the first trip in February, through the airports, you were really weary of the Chinese travelers, and then on the way back, it had gotten to Italy, so you were weary of the Chinese and the Italian travelers, and then on the next trip, it had gone to Iran, and so you were weary of now the Chinese, the Italians, and the Iranians, and then, of course, the whole world came to an end suddenly. And we all went indoors and had to live through a very interesting period. And I think it's been an interesting journey for everybody. Everybody's had to look inside. My journey was no different from anybody else. I went through all the human reactions of panic, anger, acceptance, and then increasing comfort with the situation, to the point where I didn't want to leave home when the lockdown was finished and unlock was announced. It felt so comfortable and a bit bizarre to go out and meet a few people. So I don't have a presentation to run you through, but I'll run through my experience over the 12 weeks, and I'll try and keep it within the 8 minutes you've given us. India is going through a very interesting phase right now with 500,000, 500,000 infections at the moment after a 9-week lockdown. So the government shut down with 4 hours notice on the 24th of March when there was 500 cases, and kept extending the lockdown every 3 weeks, and had to open 9 weeks later with what are called the unlock phase, through 3 unlock phases over 3 months at 500,000 cases that are now increasingly going up exponentially. So I think the government has very limited room to move because one crisis eventually became 2. You had a health crisis, which became an economic crisis, and the decimation of the economy could lead to the 3rd crisis, which could be hunger or crime or things spinning out of control. So my pondering through all of this was, in the first weeks of the lockdown, India is bizarre in that 150,000 people die a year in road accidents. That's 10 people a day or a week. And the WHO, still trust their numbers, says it's 3 times that. During the lockdown, less people died because there was nobody on the road accidents. And the question I kept thinking about was, why didn't the government emergency and lock down the economy till people learned to drive, that it seemed to show for Corona? And I went through a period of introspection of why did all of the governments get seduced by, you had many different models. You had Sweden on one side that had a very limited reaction and trusted the maturity of people, and then you had China on the other extreme that had an extreme lockdown, and India, South Africa chose to go down that route. And I wondered, why was this the case? And a lot of research later, the aha moment came about. Countries like India and South Africa and others that went for a strict lockdown believed the numbers coming out of China, which was only 3,000 people perished to Corona, and then they had an extreme lockdown for 7 weeks and had a 100% success rate in eradicating Corona. So it became easy to go, well, that's what I need to do in my economy as well. And it explains the seduction many countries have had for a lockdown. The other perspective I had on this was the systems that govern the world. And bear with me, I'm going to be a little philosophical here. The systems that govern the world are similar no matter where we are, and that's because of colonialism. Country has a parliament, whatever it calls itself. It'll call itself a parliament in the UK, a senate, and the Chinese have their version of it. But it's a big room where a lot of people turn up once or twice a year and make decisions about who lives. And the other pillars of the country are defense, the judicial, regulatory, or policy, economics, and the likes come in. And over the 200 years have been managed by people who are experts in the pillars. So if you were a good politician, you started within the political party and you managed your politics well enough to be prime minister. If you were a good soldier, you managed the politics of being a soldier and you became a general. If you were a good judge or a legal expert, you managed that politics and you became a judge, and the same for policy or regulator. Corona presented something that was way outside the core competence of any of these pillars for once. There wasn't somebody who could answer the question, and everybody had to go down the corridor to meet the health guy that nobody knew what he was doing, who came from the perspective of the safest airline is one that doesn't fly. So we are in this position today where everybody is in a position of not knowing anything. And that really well explains why every country is doing things differently. And even within countries, why states are doing things differently. In America, you have Texas questioning whether they should unlock or not. In India, you have Chennai down, while Delhi says it won't. Everybody is way outside their comfort zones, and nobody really knows much. and therein lies the situation. So we're in for a period of extended unknowns, and that means that we're going to have some severe economic crises and some severe decisions, as Chet was saying, in terms of cash, working capital, business contingencies, business sustainability coming out of this. At the start of the lockdown, I held video conferences with every one of our customers, the CEOs of every one of our customers, and I did it again at the end of the lockdown. I was surprised at how easy it was suddenly to meet all the CEOs who didn't have time before, but now sitting at home with not much to do, they were quite happy to have a chinwag with an hour-long discussion. And the discussion in the beginning of the lockdown was, don't worry, it's going to bounce back V-shaped. It's a spring, and the longer, the tighter you compress it, the more it'll bounce back. 12 weeks later is a very different discussion. 12 weeks later, it's about soft demand, letting people go, getting access to crisis funding from banks. And I think Chet's right. To see a very new world coming out of this. We're going to have some companies that don't survive. We're going to have some companies that get stronger, some that are nimble and able to pivot, and others that amalgamated or disappear. That's just the reality. 2020 is a watershed year, not just for economy countries. We're seeing it in terms of governance. We're seeing it in terms of how policing will change. It'll become more fair in some countries, harsher in others. So it's going to be a very interesting period. And I think, to quote Winston Churchill, we're not at the end. We're not even in the middle. We're likely at the beginning. The main part is yet to come. And we have to be resilient and prepared to see ourselves through this. My own experience, the hard parts were, not getting enough exercise, this of being away from people, working your way through the panic of watching this slow train wreck, which is the global economy going through the decimation that it is. Outside, there's been the opportunity to reconnect with family, reconnect with my wife or myself. My wife used to call me a paying guest because I was traveling so much. Now I've become more of a long-term permanent guest. There's been the opportunity for meditation and the clarity that comes from meditation, the clarity of what you need to do for your business, the opportunity just to focus on your business for one thought, for one challenge, is quite a gift. My own lessons, just to wrap up this section, my lessons are gratitude is very important as a business leader, and it's very, very important for your mental and emotional health. And I'm grateful for the lockdown. I think us all a lot. The other lesson I had is that stuff than we think we do. It's we're crazy consumers in many ways, and the 12 weeks has shown we don't really need half of the things. I also learned that climate change is real, and to see the skies that are blue over like they were in the 80s or the 90s, convince people that just as we move from physical meetings to virtual meetings so easily because technology has permitted it, we all went weak. Here we are. We can do the same with climate change, and my has been, no matter what, I think we'll get through this. It came here to teach us a lesson. We will get through it, and we'll be better for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravin. There's some very pertinent insights there, very wide-ranging as well. And you know how keenly we feel about hydrogen and the clean energies transition here. I have a question for you, if I may. We've already heard today, just from yourself, that there are some very regional differences in the depth and duration of lockdown. So do you think we'll see some very regional or localized lessons learned from this? Will they emerge, and surely the same approaches will differ actually throughout the world?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It will be, because everybody has adopted a different lockdown. Vietnam had a Swedish-style lockdown, and China and India had a very different one. Indonesia has a completely different approach as well. And then Singapore had the circuit breaker. So everyone's learned very different lessons from this. I bring it and clean energy, I think, because the one major lesson for everyone has been we can actually live with fresh air, with healthy air, and we can actually be productive and yet be energy consumers. We've gotten used to the concept of we do need to rape the environment and pillage and look for coal and burn hydrocarbons and live with all this pollution in Delhi and Beijing and in but we've seen right now we don't. And there's another lever that sits on top of that, and that's geopolitics. You've seen all this geopolitical storm that's going on right now with having its fishermen pushed out of their own waters, India having its own borders challenged. You're seeing that geopolitics is coming back in a big way, and the ability to delever ourselves from the tyranny of hydrocarbons to rely on geopolitically instability and having to make peace with policies that do not sit with your core values. Green energy provides us the opportunity to get away from all of that. Hydrogen can be made by anybody. Hydrogen can be made in the backyard, as we've seen in Sweden. Hydrogen can be made through wind or be made through wave energy already. I'm not preaching about how it happened, and it's at a cost that's entirely conceivable. And the cost of hydrogen, as we've seen in the European summit last week, will be at the cost of diesel within the next 3 years. The opportunity to delever economies such as Vietnam, India, from the tyranny of hydrocarbons presents itself right front and center. And I think you will see that a lot of governments will pump money, just as the Europeans have in a big way, into renewable. Hydrogen is new, and so there's a lot of very, very strong opinions about hydrogen. My LinkedIn inbox is mailed very often about other renewable energy forms instead of hydrogen. The truth is all forms of renewable energy will come to the fore, not just hydrogen. Hydrogen is an enabler because you don't lose the electricity. It's stored in a physical or a chemical molecule. But hydrogen will enable all sorts of renewable energy. I do forecast that you will see countries that never contemplated it, like India, Vietnam, bringing it to the 2020 or 2021 strategic agenda.
Okay, thank you, Ravin. That was great. I understand we might have had a technical difficulty while Chet was talking, so I would just like to come back to Chet at Enova and repeat my question from before. We'd like to ask you, Chet, before we move on, as a leading technology innovator, do you think this pandemic and the resulting measures have thrown the spotlight on both digitization and remote monitoring technologies? Absolutely, no worries, and thank you for that. Now over to our third and final panelist, Stephen Harrison. Steve, you are of course based in Europe and in Germany in particular, where it was felt that the lessons in dealing with this pandemic were learned very early on. Is that the case? And as someone celebrating 30 years in the industry this year, what's your independent perspective on the lessons learned from lockdown?
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Chet. Thanks, Ravin. And hello, everybody listening today. Rob, I'm going to start with this message.
Sorry, Steve, I'm not sure if you're on mute there.
I'm not muted, Rob.
We can hear him. We can hear Steve.
So I'll proceed. I think others can hear me. 36 years ago, Gorbachev and Reagan held a historic meeting in Reykjavik. It was a brave step towards international security. They rose to the defining challenge of their generation. Right now, we are grappling with two defining challenges of our generation: the coronavirus and climate change. My belief is that the industrial gases industry can make a unique contribution to these two issues. On the coronavirus, remarkable actions have been taken by many people in and around our industry to ensure that medical oxygen can reach. Let me give you three examples from many that I could mention. Firstly, when it became evident that we would need to ramp up medical oxygen supplies in Europe, IGA revised the guidelines on the supply of medical oxygen. Safety remained the priority, but some intelligent temporary changes were made to ensure that additional oxygen could enter the supply chain to reach patients. Lives have been saved. Secondly, our sector has rallied around to make liquid oxygen available to field hospitals and expand supplies to established hospitals. The tanks that have been installed had, in some cases, been allocated to other projects. Through a collective focus on the issue in hand, priorities were juggled, plans were changed, and the hospital tank installations went ahead. People pulled together to do the right thing. More lives were saved. Thirdly, the potential for PSA oxygen to supplement liquid oxygen supply to hospitals has been recognized. And the EDQM recently initiated a process to create a new monograph for 98% oxygen. This would enable a wider range of PSA equipment to be used to make medical oxygen. In Europe, we have been fortunate that cylinder and liquid medical oxygen supplies have continued to flow. And in many countries in Europe, the infection rates are now falling. But the WHO has this week highlighted the need for more oxygen concentrators. The work that began in Europe on this new monograph may have relevance internationally. Many of our colleagues around the world have been applying their energy and ingenuity to ensure that medical oxygen reaches patients. They might have been working like superheroes, but they have not been immune to the virus, as the recent death of Stuart Dow reminded us. He was a champion of hydrogen and a colleague of mine for many years at BOC. By the way, an online tribute to his work and his life, organised by the UK Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, will be held next Tuesday. In addressing the second defining challenge of our generation, as Stuart's work in hydrogen underlines, our industry also has expertise that can make our planet carbon neutral. COVID-19 is an acute problem, but climate change is a chronic issue that cannot be ignored. Although I'm sure nobody would have planned things to be this way, the coronavirus pandemic might have boosted the emerging role that hydrogen will play in mitigating climate change through decarbonisation. For example, the Recovery Plan has committed significant funds to hydrogen as a renewable energy source. Additionally, in Germany, where I now live, a post-COVID-19 economic stimulus programme has promised billions of euros for green hydrogen. This long-term investment will create jobs and support a carbon-neutral future. Let me bring this back to the world of industrial gases. We are the engineers who design and operate mega-scale ASUs, which supply oxygen to gasification units that make hydrogen from coal and waste materials such as petcoke. When gasification is combined with CCS, the hydrogen can be produced in a low-carbon way. We are the masters of hydrogen production from natural gas on steam methane reformers. Again, combine this with CCS and we have a route to hydrogen. Furthermore, many industrial gases companies are getting closer to electrolyzer technologies, which can convert renewable power to green hydrogen. Some of these hydrogen production pathways will be important bridges on the way to full carbon neutrality. Others could still be part of our energy mix hundreds of years from now. When it comes to working together internationally, regions that are blessed with abundant sun, wind, or hydroelectric power will undoubtedly become hydrogen exporters. In Germany, it's anticipated that we will need to import 2/3 of our energy in the future. In some cases, pipelines will be used to transport hydrogen gas. And for other trade routes, the shipping of cryogenic liquid hydrogen will become common, like we move liquefied natural gas around the world today. When it comes to the liquefaction of gases and the handling of cryogenic fluids, the industrial gases sector has the necessary expertise. In mobility applications, hydrogen is stored as a fuel on cars, trucks, buses, and boats in high-pressure cylinders at up to 700 bar. The expertise required to manufacture fueling stations which can deliver hydrogen to this pressure resides in the industrial gases value chain, as does the competence to produce lightweight gas cylinders that can store hydrogen safely at 700 bar. These are some of the reasons that I'm convinced that we, the people watching Gas World TV today, will rise to the climate change. Let me try that again. Will rise to the challenge of climate change, just like we've recently risen to the challenge of COVID-19. I'm proud to be celebrating 30 years of involvement in the industrial gases sector next month. It continues to give me a sense of purpose every day. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. It was certainly an incredible effort in terms of medical oxygen delivery and rising to that challenge. And it's also interesting to hear you further those calls to action in hydrogen and clean energies. Steve, we've talked a bit here about digital technologies and some concepts around the new business playbook. But from a wider industry perspective, do you see any of these lessons really being implemented in the future? Will anything really change? And we might well ask, does it need to?
Some of the people I've spoken to are very, very content with this kind of communication. A little bit nervous. We've been able to video conference for a long time, but this has really forced us. It's pushed us over the edge. And when I talk to them, they talk about cost pressure, cost containment. They're becoming more aware of the environmental impact of travel. And they're seeing that this kind of thing can work very, very well. Some sales teams that I've spoken to have actually increased their customer engagement, a bit like Rav was talking about earlier on. People are willing to talk to you. It's easier to get 6 or 7 calls in a day when you're not having to travel several hundred kilometers in your car. So customer engagement can increase, costs can go down, and the technology is enabling it. So I certainly think that the way we communicate internally and with our customers will be a lasting change. Of course, there'll still be conferences. People will need to get together. And to be honest, I'm itching. I'm itching to get out into the real world again. Let me tell you that. Come back to the Oxygen 98 monograph. It was something that was kicked off as a result of COVID-19. We don't need it quite so much in Europe just now because we're coping pretty well with the existing oxygen supplies. But that, again, could be a lasting impact. I think it's around about 15 years since the oxygen monographs were ever touched or looked at. And it's great that we're having another look at those to basically make sure that the technology of today is aligned to what the hospital clinicians and nurses and doctors can use. So yes, I think there will be a lasting change. And the way that hydrogen will become a critical industrial gas, as it already is, but even more critical industrial gas, as the industrial gases sector converges with the energy sector. I think that's another lasting change, which was on the way, but I think has been accelerated by some of the things that have happened since COVID-19 started.
Thanks, Steve. I think there's many of us that are itching to get back out there, and certainly at Gas World, we can't wait to get our events program back up and running next year. Now, ladies and gentlemen and viewers, the floor is open to Q&A. So let's see if we have any questions for you after this very short message from Enova. Welcome back. Okay, so let's have a look. We have over 180 participants in the room today, which is fantastic. Welcome to you all. In the interest of brevity, I'm going to pick just a few questions here for our panel. And first of all, until I see some come through, I'd like to go to Ravin, if we may. Raven, I have a question for you. Coming back to our theme of bandwidth in your business, could it be the case that some businesses simply haven't been able to find any extra bandwidth, that they haven't been able to adapt so well to these new conditions?
Yeah, that's another good question, and I'm reminded of my MBA school. Culture eats strategy. Culture eats strategy. And if you think of it that way, the bandwidth comes down. Business comes down. And if you do not have a culture that is nimble, that is able to move quickly, that rewards mistakes, from mistakes, not to make them again, you will not have a situation like this to deal with a situation like this. This is not dissimilar to the global financial people. Most industries around the world used to make 4% growth, 5% growth a year from 1988, and suddenly things couldn't compute because you couldn't anymore. And the reaction of the whole world must stop. We stop for 6 months. We understand what's going on. And Corona is 2020 now, compounded by everything else going on, not just geopolitics, the Corona economy, but geopolitics, whatever is going on with Black Lives Matter. How these things are going to compound the problems. So the bandwidth, being able to become light, being able to again become light and nimble again. First priority, get through this time, survive. And some companies will, some companies won't. Here get amalgamated, and that's just the reality. The Second World War, the Great Depression, or even the global financial coming out of the ones who survive. Then need to because the world's not going to look the same. The world sure has changed. We as a human race will change. And companies therefore have to react to their new environment, find the opportunities, analyze in depth where the world has pivoted, and there's this Chet was talking about towards this new, in some instances, IoT-enabled world. In some instances, as Stephen has talked about, of hydrogen and green energy. But if you don't have the bandwidth, I reckon you're toast.
Thanks, Raven. I'm just looking through the questions here. I can see we have a question from Olaf Schulenberg. For the panel, it's not addressed to anyone in particular. Do you see a storing technology for hydrogen in front, liquid or high pressure? Would anyone like to tackle that one?
I'll talk to you a little bit about a study that was conducted in Germany recently, specifically for hydrogen mobility on inland waterways, on rivers. And the study investigated 6 renewable fuels, 350 bar, 100 bar hydrogen, some synthetic hydrocarbons, some e-fuels and things like that. What the study, again, maritime bunkering, so bunkering fuels on the riverside, storing fuels inside barges and vessels. What the study concluded was that liquid hydrogen works. 700 bar hydrogen works. 350 bar hydrogen, the other liquid fuels, e-fuels as well, synthetic diesel, biofuels, again, could also work. The idea was to put them through a steam methane reformer, create hydrogen on the ship. Also, the common theme was a fuel cell fed by hydrogen, and the question was very simply, how did you start with that hydrogen, compressed gas or other hydrocarbons? Aviation is another good example. About 20 years ago, Airbus in Germany invented, never actually flew, invented an aeroplane. And inside the aeroplane, there were going to be liquid hydrogen storage tanks. And interestingly, with aviation, the shape of the plane doesn't matter too much, but the weight matters tremendously. And liquid hydrogen has one of the best and exceptionally good energy to weight ratio, even though the volume for storage is quite high. We're seeing pipeline hydrogen supplies being proposed. Nord Stream 2, this huge natural gas pipeline flowing from Russia to Europe, is designed for natural gas. It is also hydrogen ready. So if the Russians want to turn their natural gas into hydrogen and put it ready for that, and in other parts of the world, for example, hydrogen exports from Australia to Japan, that will be taken taking place, a pilot with liquid hydrogen very, very soon. So high pressure compressed hydrogen, hydrogen down a pipeline, liquid hydrogen. It really depends on the application. Horses for courses, they've all got a role to play.
Thanks, Stephen. Another question here. Hydrogen's clearly the trending topic right now. I'll put this one to Ravin first, and then perhaps a perspective from Chet afterwards. We've got a question from Pradeep Singh, and it is, what are the technical challenges you foresee for transporting hydrogen given the recent safety issues in handling?
Very good question. And I'm always what everybody goes to when they think of unfortunate. It was very interesting. It was at the Gas World conference that you did in Amsterdam. We had the BMW project manager for the hydrogen vehicle she made, which was striking, and I've heard it over and over again on their TV interviews. Is for their hydrogen vehicle, the only thing that really survived was didn't have any hydrogen because of the way it was designed to release all the hydrogen into the atmosphere and disappears very quickly. All of those wonderful James Bond and influences up because of all the hydrocarbon fuels and disappear. Won't have that. When the hydrocarbon vehicle first came about, I'm sure in 1910, 1915, there was a lot of concern about this thing being a bomb that you're driving. It's a lot less safer than being on a horse. Are there safety issues? Yes, different from LPG or LNG or CNG or petrol or diesel? No, different. In fact, a lot safer because you have an industry that has been focused over 100 years on safety. The industrial gases industry entirely focused on safe distribution, safe use. Whether the complexities are any different. Yes, as an industry, we have a lot of work to do to educate humanity, to educate the world. And it wouldn't have been dissimilar to when LNG or LPG was first introduced. So, short answer, it's not as unsafe compared to what we. But the infrastructure, and when you think of large countries, large areas with very, I think of India. There's a hydrogen project in the Himalayas going on right now, where they have -20 in the winter and +20 in the summer. It's at 11,000 feet. Going to behave in these kind of complexities that we need to be focusing on and using the expertise that has already been developed in many other parts of the world. But I would feel a lot safer with a hydrogen truck that is part of the industrial gases distribution system passing me with tanks I've seen around the world.
Thanks, Ravin. And I'll turn to you, Chet, for kind of part two of that, if we may. By extension, would you have anything to add in terms of the remote monitoring capabilities and how that can improve handling?
Sure. I think I could speak as eloquent and Ravin on this topic.
Thanks, Chet. And so is hydrogen a hot topic for Enova as well? Are you experiencing that? Okay, thank you. And I actually have another question for you, Chet. Finally, and as our sponsor today at Enova, I'd just like to ask, what one lesson would you like us to see, learn and take forward from this? Absolutely. Thank you, Jet. Now I believe we're going to have one more message from Enova. Well, that concludes our webinar today. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be leaving this virtual gathering richer in insights, and if nothing else, a sense of assurance in all our shared learnings over the last few months. I'd like to sincerely thank our panelists today, Chet Reshamwala of Enova, Ravin Merchandani of MacValves, and Stephen Harrison of SPH4 in Germany. And of course, thank all of you at home, in the office and all around the world for your participation. The discussion and debate continues next week, same time and same place at Gaswell TV, as we look at the operations and supply chain optimization with independent consultant Art Anderson and Trackabout Asia Pacific's Kai Wei-Guo. Please do go online at gasworld.tv to learn more and register for the next 2 webinars in our Bandwidth in Your Business series. We look forward to seeing you again. Until next week, thank you and goodbye.